So, in the last video, I tried to give a little bit of an introduction to what I would take to be some of the basic features of aesthetic experience. As broad as it is, it has to do with embodiment, has to do with feelings, has to do with caring about those feelings, the transformation of those feelings, and what this opens up to us. And that it has to do with the way in which we use and encounter this situation, this aesthetic circumstance, milieu, if you like. In terms of things, especially human activities, especially art, with regard to this. And so, if I had to talk about what I think aesthetic experience is, I would talk about it as, I've written it down right here, it's a reflection upon our situation as dynamic, sensual, embodied beings. Dynamic, sensual, embodied beings who, by virtue of our situation, care in a way that dwells complementarily, so works in the presence of and dimensions of our embodiment. Now, what I want to talk about in this video is why care about that. As much as this seems to be a basic thing that I think many people might take for granted in some ways, I do think it's worth asking, why should I care about aesthetics? Yeah, it's basic, and yeah, I suppose it gives me pleasure or pain in some way, but that seems to be more of a practical matter than a theoretical one. I mean, I can just go out and see movies I like and drink things I like and eat things I like and meet people I like, and I'll just do things I like, and that's all I need to do. I don't need to think about it. I don't need to have a theory about it. It doesn't help anything. It certainly doesn't help me at all. Right? This is something that I think a lot of people would say. Why care about aesthetics, even as basic as they are? What is the reason, precisely, for caring about aesthetics? Or can we have some precise reasons for caring about aesthetics? And let me, in order to refine that a little bit, let me address the question a little further. I think that there are some reasons, some arguments that one might make why it's not worth caring about aesthetics. Here's what they are. For one thing, the objects of aesthetics are fleeting. They're ephemeral. They pass. Now you might say, well, gee, duh. Of course, everything passes, right? But let me tell you, let me draw this out a bit. Ironically, I think that there is a way that it is, in many senses, the ephemerality of our senses that gives the power to our senses. The fact that a fragrance lingers for a while and then passes away and moves us makes a difference about what that is. The fact that sound in music has its proportion and its silence and proceeds and organizes and rises and moves us and then ends and has to end so that we can hear it as music makes a difference. All of these things that we're encountering in art and in aesthetic experience generally, because we encounter them through our senses, have to be ephemeral. And given that they have to be ephemeral, given that they have to be things that we know in this way, in this passing and disappearing, that we don't know them the way we know, say, I don't know, geometric axioms, for instance, that we can take as given static, grounding truths about certain physical proportionalities in the world, principles of proportionality. That makes a difference, you know. A lot of people, Plato being first and foremost among them probably, would say this is precisely why you distrust senses. You distrust the aesthetic, no matter how powerful its movement seems to be in you, no matter how powerful your emotions may seem to be, no matter how moving a sight or a sound may be, you can't trust it because it passes. And because it passes, you can't really know it for what it is. I don't agree with this, but this is a classical argument, and I think it's one that's very much worth considering. There's another argument that's made about aesthetic experience too, as why it's not worth paying too much attention to. And that is that it's ambiguous. You know, again, if you think about the whole panoply of possibilities in human knowledge, one of the things that you will see is that there are certain ways of knowing that are quite discrete and precise, and you can know exactly what is being said and exactly what is being portrayed by virtue of it. Again, mathematics and logic, these are two examples of ways in which knowledge is pristine and precise and exact, and the idea is clear and distinct, to quote Descartes on this, right? Something that helps us know exactly what we're talking about and what we're talking about in distinction to everything else that we would possibly be talking about. Well, aesthetics usually isn't that way. Aesthetics, appropriately enough, seems to work within our mind and our phenomenal encounter with the world like a watercolor. It bleeds, it blends, one sense depends upon the other, or incorporates and rides upon the significance of the other, or rides upon an emotion, or resonates through an emotion, or a memory, or our imagination. It moves through all these different aspects that have to do with us and our experience and our encounter in this embodied, feeling, caring way in the world, right? Seems to be a limit to it. So, the ambiguity, the fact that senses are not clean and discrete, that they are ambiguous, that they are indiscrete, that they mingle and mix, and that this is how they come to find their form and expression within our mind and within our actions, well, some people would say this is one of the reasons why you probably ought to ignore it, at least if it's something that you want to use to come to understand about the world. Yeah. Not empirical, but aesthetic. Third, there's something that's inconsistent as far as what we arrive at with regard to aesthetic experience. In many ways, this is similar to the ambiguity point, but it has to do with the fact that with the transformational character of aesthetic experience. So much of what we encounter, what we think about, what we come to know within aesthetics has to do with the way that we are forever reinterpreting this persistent sense of change and movement and motion in our experience, right? I see one thing and another thing and another thing. I hear these different ideas. I reconsider stories that have been told to me, and then they're retold and told by, or told in a new way, or some counterexample is given and they're corrected. I have all these different experiences of my aesthetic experience in the world, and they're always being reinterpreted. The fact that they're always being reinterpreted, this compounds the whole problem of ambiguity. Not only does it get the different senses to cross and be ambiguous with one another, it gets the idea that was in the sense to cross on itself again and again and again. The result of these 2 points, the ambiguity and the inconsistency, means that when I come to know something aesthetically, I never know exactly what I'm talking about. And this, for a lot of people, that's just the dead giveaway. That's the way you can say, certainly for Plato, and for many idealists, that's the way you can say you don't really know what you're talking about, because you never know exactly what you're talking about, right? I mean, you may have an exact sense, but you don't know what the exact thing is. Fourth, again, tied up with this, appropriately enough, is the subjectivity of aesthetic experience. You know, one nice thing about logic, about mathematics, about even other forms of quasi-logical discourse, something like, I don't know, probably a lot of people would laugh at me for saying this, but something like political discourse, social discourse, something like that. is that aesthetic discourse always takes place within a subjective medium. Uh, I think actually in a lot of ways Kant might have been one of the best people to talk about something like this. Although, um, well, I'd say Kant in the Western tradition, and then the philosopher Abhinavagupta of Kashmiri Shaivism, 10th century Advaitic philosopher. Interesting with regard to this too. There's a way in which aesthetic experience is significant, and really, I think, in many ways, kind of extraordinary, by virtue of the fact that it is and always must be ours. You know, when I come to understand something that's insightful about a book or a story, when I see something beautiful in nature, a sunset, or feel a bracing breeze upon me, when I hear a beautiful sound, music, when I taste something, anything that I encounter aesthetically, there's something that's really pretty fundamental and fascinating about it. I have to encounter it. You know why it's important? It's important because it's important in the life of Seth. That's why it's important. It's entirely subjective. And this is true for you too, whoever you are out there. If you are embodied, which given that you're watching YouTube, you probably are, you have to encounter the world through these senses. And there are things that will hit you between the eyes, ironically, right, your senses, that absolutely make all the difference in the world, as beautiful, as hilarious, as dreadful, as disgusting, as wonderful, as enlightening, as all these things. But the way that they do it is entirely because you have brought all this together. You have. That's what's made it possible. Now think about that. The thing that you know most totally, most deeply, most immediately, and most profoundly through everything else that you know in a way that you explicitly know is just you. You can't share this. I mean, yeah, you can share it in the sense that you can talk about it, and if you're an artist, you can make some art about it. You can blog about it, right? You can do all these different things about it. But you alone will know what you know aesthetically. And only you can know it, because only your consciousness, only your senses, only your story is you. This is lovely, I think. For me it's lovely, but it also means that it's very epistemologically compromising. It does mean, well, what the hell do you say that you're knowing then? Because, that's great that's great for you, and I got stuff that's great for me. But I don't know what else we can say about it. We're ships in the night as far as the most important things in our lives. So what are we going to do? So we have that. And then I guess there's one last thing I would bring up with it. It's in some ways it's less philosophical, but I think it actually has a lot of significance, especially because we've been talking about the importance of embodiment. And that is this. A lot of people would say that reflecting upon aesthetic experience is just plain useless. It's useless. Now, it's not to say that you can't use aesthetic experience to change things. I mean, geez, look at advertising. That's the whole premise of it. Obviously, you can use things to entice people or to persuade people or propagandize people. Of course, no argument there. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying that you can't use our aesthetic encounter with the world to do certain things. What I'm saying is that it might be argued that the aesthetic experience in and of itself does not do anything because it cannot produce any understanding beyond your immediate understanding. The way I was talking about with the whole subjective stuff, right? So it doesn't produce, it doesn't yield anything in and of itself. And in this sense, why bother? So what do we got? What are the critiques of aesthetic experience? It's fleeting. It is something that is inconsistent. It's ambiguous. It's subjective. And, if nothing else, it's useless. Why the hell bother? Yeah, it's basic. So what? It's your problem. This is what a lot of people will say. I'm going to come back and try to answer that because I don't think it is just your problem. But I do think that those are criticisms that are worth addressing.